I woke up on the morning of our family reunion to a house that was dead quiet and a kitchen that felt like an icebox. There was a note sitting on the counter. My son and daughter-in-law had gone on a luxury vacation with her parents. Without me. For 3 years, I'd been paying half their mortgage, a house they never could have afforded on their own. They hadn't even bothered to treat me to a decent dinner in all that time. So I didn't cry. I grabbed the folder with the deed called the movers and had the locks changed. 5 days later, they came home and realized the hard way this house was never actually theirs. I woke up at 7 a.m. just like I always do in my house in Savannah. But something was off. No footsteps in the hallway, no bickering over the bathroom between my son Caleb and his wife Brooke. Instead of the big family breakfast we'd planned, I found a small note on the granite countertop, the one I'd paid for 2 years ago. We headed down to the Keys with Brooke's parents for the week. Found a last-minute deal we couldn't pass up, see you soon. Written in Brooke's messy scrawl. No invite for me. No thank you. For the fact that I'd been covering half their mortgage for 3 years just so they could live in this upscale neighborhood. I looked at the empty coffee pot. For months, Brooke had treated me like a pesky tenant in my own home, someone only good for doing the laundry and footing the bills. Just last night, they acted like we were having a big cookout today, while I was sleeping. They'd packed their bags and snuck out like thieves in the night. I didn't feel like crying. I just felt a strange, cold clarity. I was 68 years old. I'd lost my husband young and I'd worked hard my entire life. I wasn't put on this earth to be a human ATM and a maid for 2 ungrateful adults. I sat at the table and drank a glass of water. They say blood is thicker than water, but blood doesn't pay the bills. And it certainly doesn't show respect. My eyes drifted to the folder on the shelf. The paperwork was clear. I owned 60% of this house, and the contract gave me sole rights to the ground floor and the backyard. Caleb and Brooke were living upstairs, purely out of the goodness of my heart. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call my son. I called a local junk removal and moving service. It was time to reassess how much space was being used in this house. By 9 a.m., I was sitting on the back porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Everything looked so peaceful, but a precise plan was clicking into place in my mind. I walked through the house taking photos not for memories, but for inventory. The high-end washer and dryer in the laundry room, bought with my Social Security and savings. The fancy French door fridge Brooke insisted on to keep her green juices cold. My credit card. Even the Roomba gliding across the floor was a birthday gift I'd bought for myself that Caleb had promptly claimed as his own. In the last few months, Brooke had started moving my things into the basement. It just doesn't fit the modern aesthetic, Martha, she'd say, while placing her designer vases on my antique dresser. They'd forgotten that their aesthetic was built on my foundation. Caleb had always been a quiet kid, but under Brooke's thumb, he'd become a shadow of himself, just nodding along whenever she put me down. I didn't call to yell. I didn't send angry texts to Florida. Instead, I contacted a local furniture gallery that sold high-end pieces on consignment. If they could afford luxury trips, they didn't need my furniture anymore. I started carefully packing my personal things, the photos of my late husband, my books, and my clothes. That afternoon, I found a package of expensive prosciutto they'd bought for themselves in the fridge. I took it out and made myself a sandwich. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel like an intruder in that kitchen. I'd given them an inch and they'd taken a mile, all while whining and dining her parents on vacation. I pulled out my spare key to the upstairs. It was time to see exactly how much of my generosity was being taken for granted up there. The upstairs was a disaster. Brooke's expensive brand name clothes were strewn everywhere, while Caleb's home office was buried under a pile of unpaid bills. I realized then that they hadn't contributed to the utilities in 3 months. They were banking on me not noticing, or at least not saying anything. They probably thought a lonely woman my age would do anything to keep the happy family facade alive. I called the electrician. "Hi, Mr. Miller. This is Martha Vance. I want to finally split the meters for the upstairs and downstairs, like we discussed during the renovation." It was purely business. If Caleb and Brooke wanted to live like they were independent, they could start by having their own accounts for power and water. I was only paying for what I used from now on. Then I checked the mail. There were brochures for Mediterranean cruises that Brooke had circled. They were dreaming of the high life while I was holding the floor up beneath their feet. I gave a thin smile. I wasn't being mean. I was just reinstating reality. Without my financial backing, their lifestyle was a house of cards in a hurricane. I sat at my desk and wrote a short professional letter. No accusations, just facts. I was terminating my voluntary mortgage contributions effective the first of the month. That money would instead go toward renovating my space. I'd wanted a sunroom where their unnecessary second-story deck was for a long time. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman who was finally taking back control of her bank account and her front door. That night, I cooked a simple, good dinner. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was the quiet before a new order. I knew they'd be back in 5 days. 5 days was plenty of time to reorganize a life. On the 3rd day, the truck from the furniture gallery pulled into the driveway. 2 strong guys loaded up the washer, the dryer, the big fridge, and the robot vacuum. "All this yours, ma'am?" the younger one asked. I showed him the original receipts I had filed in my blue folder. "Every bit of it," I said calmly. I wasn't selling the appliances yet. I was putting them in climate-controlled storage until I needed them for my new, smaller setup. I also had them take the $3,000 sectional in the living room that I'd paid for. The room suddenly looked massive and empty, but I didn't care. Into that empty space, I moved my old wingback chair that Brooke had banished to the garden shed. It was comfortable, and it smelled like home. I sat down and read a book while the rain drummed against the windows. I realized how little I actually needed to be happy. My son's greed and my daughter-in-law's vanity had created an atmosphere of constant, not enough. Everything had to be new, expensive, and modern as long as Martha was paying. Now that the status symbols were gone, the true face of the house emerged. It was just a building made of wood and stone. That afternoon, the electrician finished separating the circuits. From that moment on, there were 2 separate power grids. I had already updated my contract. As for the upstairs, there was no active provider because Caleb had never bothered to put it in his name. I knew it would be dark and cold up there when they got back, but that wasn't my responsibility. Every adult in America has to figure out their own utilities. I went out to the garden and pruned the roses. I hadn't felt this light in years. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't insulted anyone. I had simply separated my life from those who didn't appreciate it. That's not revenge. It's just math. Day 4 was for the locks. I called a locksmith to swap out the deadbolts on the front door and the interior door that connected the ground floor to the upstairs. Since I was the sole owner of the first floor, I had every right. For Caleb and Brooke, I had a new key made for the side entrance that led directly to their stairs. They no longer had access to my kitchen, my living room, or my pantry. The locksmith gave me a funny look when I explained I was securing my privacy, but he just shrugged. "Safety first, Mrs. Vance," he said, finishing the job in an hour. I paid him in cash and put the new keys for the kids in an envelope, which I taped to the side door. I spent the afternoon making my realm downstairs cozy. Without the massive fridge and the high-tech gadgets, the kitchen looked like it used to. I put out my old ceramic canisters and hung the curtains Brooke had called tacky. Now that they were gone, the house could breathe again. It wasn't a monument to upward mobility anymore. It was a home. I checked my bank account. The stop payment on the mortgage was already processed. That was a significant chunk of change that was staying in my savings. I thought about them in the keys, probably at some overpriced restaurant right now, laughing about how stingy I was. They had no idea that this luxury vacation was about to be the most expensive trip of their lives. I didn't feel sorry for them. Pity is for people who fall into hard times through no fault of their own. Caleb and Brooke had intentionally deceived me, left me alone on a holiday, and spent my money on everyone but the person giving it to them. They set the rules. I was just playing by them. I went to bed early and slept deeper than I had in years. It was 6 p.m. on the 5th day when the Uber pulled into the driveway. I was sitting by the window in my newly rearranged living room with a cup of tea. The sun was just starting to set. I watched Caleb and Brooke get out, tan and loaded down with shopping bags from high-end boutiques. Her parents weren't with them. They must have dropped them off. They walked up to the front door, and I heard the metallic scrape of Caleb's key, the one that didn't fit anymore. He tried again and again, jiggling the handle, leaning his shoulder against the wood. Then he rang the doorbell. I didn't get up. I just sat there. The ringing got more aggressive, and then I heard Brooke's shrill voice. "Martha, open up. The lock is stuck, After a few minutes, they discovered the envelope on the side door. I watched through the peephole as Caleb read the letter. His face went from confusion to pale panic. They scrambled up the side stairs to their apartment. It didn't take 2 minutes before I heard the first scream. It was Brooke. "Where's the washer?" "Caleb, the lights won't turn on." I heard them running around upstairs, doors slamming. Then they pounded down the internal stairs to the door that connected our units. Caleb rattled the knob like a madman, but the new deadbolt held firm. "Mom, what is this?" "Open this door," he yelled. He sounded like a little boy who wasn't getting his way, not a 35-year-old man. I walked up to the door, but didn't open it. "Good evening, Caleb. Welcome back," I said, my voice steady. "Your things are upstairs. My floor is private as of today. Since you decided to plan your life without me, I decided to manage my house without you." "You've lost your mind," Brooke shrieked in the background. "Where is our stuff? We're starving. Open this door right now." "The appliances belong to me, Brooke," I replied through the wood. "I've put them in storage. Since you had enough money for a luxury Florida getaway, I'm sure you'll have no problem buying your own. And as for food, the Kroger down the street is still open for another hour." Caleb thudded his fist against the door. "Mom, this is crazy. It's pitch black up here. We don't have power. What did you do?" "I simply stopped paying for things I don't use," I explained calmly. "I had the utilities separated. You'll need to call the power company and set up your own account. It usually takes a few business days. Until then, I suggest flashlights. Or maybe you have some leftover candles from your last spa weekend." I heard Brooke start to cry, that theatrical sobbing that used to make me go soft. Today, it did nothing. I went back to my kitchen and started making an omelet. The smell of fresh herbs filled the air. Upstairs, the arguing started. Caleb was blaming her, saying the trip was too expensive. She was screaming back that it was his job to keep his crazy mother under control. It was fascinating to see how fast the happy vacationer facade crumbled when the AC was off and the Wi-Fi was gone. Without the internet, Caleb was totally lost. He probably didn't even know where the fuse box for his new circuit was. But that wasn't my problem. I'd carried them for 3 years. The ride was over. By 9 p.m., it got quieter upstairs. I looked out the window and saw Caleb heading to the car with a small flashlight. They were probably grabbing blankets from the trunk. The house was officially divided. My side was warm, bright, and peaceful. Their side was a dark cave full of expensive, useless clothes. The next morning, a tapping on my kitchen window woke me up. It was Caleb. He looked terrible. His hair was a mess, and he was shivering in the morning air. I cracked the window just an inch. "Yes, Caleb." "Mom, please," he said quietly. "Brooke is threatening to move back in with her parents. We can't live like this. There's no hot water. Can you at least give us the washer back and the mortgage?" The bank called. The payment didn't go through. "That's right," I said. "I stopped the transfer. I'm not willing to finance a house where I'm treated like a burden. If Brooke wants to move back to her parents' place, she should. Maybe they have room for all her designer bags." "How can you be so cold?" he asked, tears welling up. "We're family." I looked him dead in the eye. "Family is a two-way street, Caleb. You guys have been driving the wrong way for 3 years. You flew off without a word while I was inside preparing a feast for a celebration that never happened. You threw my furniture in the shed and ignored me. This isn't being cold. This is the consequence of your own choices." I closed the window and pulled the curtains. Later that day, I saw a U-Haul. But it wasn't for my furniture. Brooke was actually packing. Her dad had come to pick her up. He gave me a hateful look through the window, but I just gave him a polite nod. He'd enjoyed the vacation I'd indirectly paid for. Now he could enjoy having his daughter back on his payroll. Caleb stayed behind. He sat on the steps of the side entrance, staring out at the yard. For the first time in his life, he looked like an adult who realized that life isn't free. I went out and handed him a Post-it note with the utility company's number. "If you call today, you might have power by Wednesday," I said, matter-of-factly. The days turned into weeks. The house was quiet, but a different kind of quiet than before. Caleb lived alone upstairs. Without Brooke's constant prodding, he seemed lost. He had to handle his own housework now. I saw him at the local laundromat, looking baffled by the machines. He tried a few times to invite me to dinner in my kitchen, of course, but I turned him down every time. "We can talk when you have a plan on how you're going to pay your share of this house alone," I told him one afternoon in the garden. "I am not stepping in again." He finally confessed that they were drowning in debt. The trips, the clothes, the car, it was all on credit, bought with the assumption that my inheritance, or my monthly checks, would plug the hole, without my $2,000 a month. Their entire financial system collapsed. It was the classic story of people trying to be someone they couldn't afford to be. I didn't feel any triumph. It was more like a sad confirmation of what I'd suspected. I suggested we sell the house. "I want my 60% share paid out," I said. "I'm going to buy a nice little condo downtown near my friends and the theater. You can take your remaining share and start over humbly." He cried for real, then realizing the big house, the symbol of his fake success, was gone. But he didn't fight me. He knew I had the documents and the proof of every payment. In a courtroom, he wouldn't have stood a chance. And I think he didn't want to burn the last bridge of our relationship. I didn't help him pack. I didn't cook for him. I stayed in my space and enjoyed my freedom. I started looking at Zillow listings for condos. For the first time since my husband died, I was planning a future where I was the main character. 4 months later, the for sale sign was gone. The house had been sold to a young family with 2 toddlers who were clearly over the moon to be there. Caleb had rented a small 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. He was working full-time at a logistics company, hard work, but he was bringing home his own paycheck. Brooke was gone for good. The reality of a man without my financial support wasn't what she'd signed up for. I stood in my empty living room waiting for the movers to take me to my new life. My 60% from the sale was a small fortune enough to ensure a very comfortable retirement. I had no debt, no obligations, and, most importantly, no people around me who mistook my kindness for weakness. Caleb came by to say goodbye. He looked thinner, but his eyes were clearer. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly, "for waking me up. It was brutal, but I think I'm starting to get what it means to actually be responsible for myself." I gave him a quick hug. "I love you, Caleb, but I'm not carrying you anymore. Come see me at the new place once you're settled. But bring your own wine." He gave a weak smile and nodded. I got into my car. As I drove down the driveway, I watched the house get smaller in the rearview mirror. It was a beautiful house, but it was just a shell. My real home was inside me, my principles, my peace, and my hard-won freedom. When I got to my new condo, the first thing I did was unpack my coffee maker. I brewed a cup and sat on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The sun felt warm on my face. There were no unread notes, no cold shoulders, and no unpaid bills. Just me and the smell of fresh coffee. Some people don't notice the ground you provide until it's pulled out from under them. They only understand your value when they're falling. I didn't seek revenge. I just stopped paying for the life they used to look down on me.